Welcome to the 6-5 podcast. I'm your host today, joined by my ever-present co-host, as he likes to say about me, Patrick Moorhead of Moor Insights and Strategy. Patrick Moorhead, welcome to this week's 6-5.
Daniel, thanks. It's great. We're finally getting the hang of this, but I have to wear collared shirts now for the video stuff. I mean, what's up with that?
Yeah, we are fully dialed in. You can see now we got our little logos. I got to get used to that mirror thing. You can see our brightnesses are a little different. You're looking at the difference between an 8K and a 4K monitor. You're also looking at probably differences in the amount of daylight that are coming into our offices at this period of time. It's funny, Pat, we used to always start off this show talking about where we were, where we're going, and we are been nowhere and we're going nowhere. And so this show is a very different, but it's funny because we also have come to the conclusion that somehow, despite traveling exponentially less, we are working more.
What's up with that, Daniel? We've got to get the equation right,
We do. And, you're down there in Austin, Texas. I'm here in Chicago. You're in the end of the most intense lockdown period for Texas. I'm probably just in the beginning of the of the lockdown period here in Chicago. Coming to Texas, buddy. But no, we got a great show for everyone today. And this show will be one of our periodic, I say, probably about twice a quarter. We kind of have what I would call an earnings edition. This week has been the week for big tech, for earnings. They are spilling out on a daily basis. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, AMD, Qualcomm. Those are what we're covering today, but there were also a few others. Facebook posted their earnings this week. Twitter posted their earnings this week. But as you know, this show, big on tech, big on deep analysis. We don't really focus on ads and social. So when we talk about Google and we talk about Amazon, we're going to be focusing on the cloud. And by the way, I just got to do the little disclaimer here before we dive into our first earnings coverage. And that is this show is for information and entertainment purposes only. And while we are talking about publicly traded companies, and in fact, in this show, we're talking a lot about publicly traded companies, the trading of these public companies, the investments, the strategies, and the business. We are not providing any sort of investment advice. Do not buy any stocks or options or equities or futures or bonds or invest in any loans or debts or anything with any tech companies, because anything you heard on this show today, by the way, that was the longest and most fun I've ever had doing a disclaimer. And by the way, being that it's 5:30 in the afternoon on April 30th as we record this thing, I'm just happy to see Pat smile. All right, diving in, first earnings topic. Let's talk about Microsoft. Pat, Microsoft had a really, really good quarter. They came in at $1.40 a share, over the 126 expected, 35 billion over the 33.6 billion expected. The net income rose. I think it's across something like 11 categories that the company it measures on a quarterly basis. They went flat or up on all of them. No decreases, not even in Xbox and gaming, which you could probably understand why. But that's been something that over the past few quarters has sort of been a little bit of a thorn in the side. Huge growth in Azure. 59%, which, by the way, matches their Q1 for 2020. This is their fiscal Q3, by the way. So they're on a fiscal calendar. Dynamics 365 and the Dynamics business was strong. Cloud business is strong. And Pat, I got to say, Teams business. So we heard mid-March, Microsoft Teams went from like 11 million to 44 million in the first quarter. And then over that next month has almost doubled. As they've gone from 44 to, I think it's somewhere just over 75 million daily users on Microsoft Teams. So when you heard the numbers coming in strong, you have to realize this company's on, their customers are business customers. These customers are transforming their businesses. They're continuing investments. They're growing their businesses and accelerating as work has gone home and as companies are trying to find the best ways to survive. But man, what a great quarter. What do you think about Microsoft?
So I had expected this up front, that they were going to have a good Q3. And, the company's insulated right now more than others from the big impacts of COVID-19. The company's primarily a B2B play, and what is or what will get negatively hit more are those consumer discretionary spend products and services, including advertising, like we saw from Apple and like we're going to talk about Google. as well. I think the other thing too is that Microsoft is offering products and services that actually are helping get people through the crisis. You talked about Teams and the explosive growth there, and I think finally, I'll call it the biggest missed opportunity was in Surface, where demand was huge. So the channel got cleared out, but they couldn't. Inventory was depleted, but unfortunately, the supply chain constraints kept them from refilling the channel. And Daniel, I think the company could have easily sold an additional 15, maybe 20% more if it were available. It's bone dry. You can't buy a Surface.
Yeah, it's definitely been stretched to the edge. We'll talk about the same kind of situation later when we talk about Amazon. These companies, the demand for tech right now is off the charts, and tech is the enabler of companies not only surviving but thriving in the wake of what's going on with COVID-19. Having said that, though, nobody took anything for granted. I mean, you and I have our fingers on the pulse of the industry. We both said Microsoft was going to do well, but the industry did not necessarily know that. If you watch CNBC, I talked to Bloomberg last week about it. Nobody was quite sure. Nobody was 100% feeling confident that anybody was going to have this good of a week. So the market shot up, but that's really because if you look, Google, Facebook, all these companies, they did. Qualcomm, we'll talk about them later, all did pretty well, given the fact that China was essentially shut down for the whole quarter that we're really measuring, and the U.S. and Europe was starting to teeter in the latter part of these quarters, and these companies were fulfilling services, delivering products, and growing in every category. Now, it's probably worth pointing out Satya was conservative in guidance going forward. He acknowledged there might be some headwinds in some areas of the business, especially some of that discretionary small, medium businesses, the ones that have been hardest hit by COVID, could see a little bit of a decrease. This could mean a little bit of a softness in LinkedIn advertising for Microsoft. But in the cloud, I see acceleration, enterprise software acceleration, services acceleration. And the company even has some things to be excited about with like devices, because the demand for devices is high. And if we get stuck at home much longer, that next generation Xbox could be a really hot product as well.
Oh, it's going to fly off the shelves. And as we saw, and we're going to talk a little bit about AMD, AMD said they weren't going to be shipping any chips, and they didn't sell any chips for consoles. But when it goes online, it's going to go online big. And there were some very positive game sales and interactivity on the Xbox Live network was high.
Right on, Pat. Let's move to Google. I'll let you take this one.
Yeah. So Google, this one I didn't quite know what was going to come in. I mean, most of Google's or Alphabet's revenue is from advertising. So you would have expected revenue to be down significantly. Well, revenue was actually up 13%, and really, I think it's important to realize that most of Google's revenue was driven pre-Western world shutdown in March. So that's why it didn't completely tank, because the company doesn't actually operate in China that had the earlier shutdown in January. I think the real test will be in Q2. And generally speaking, advertising spend follows consumer spend and confidence, which was down. I think my biggest, what I was really impressed with and continue to be impressed with, is the growth in Google Cloud, not to be confused with GCP, which is a subset, but Google Cloud also includes things like G Suite and Google Meet, that literally is getting 3 million new signups a day. And they saw 52% growth in all of Google Cloud. And whether you're working from home, whether you're schooling from home, whether you're governing from home, the company was able to take advantage of that. Now, I do need to say that, versus some of the other cloud giants, that 52% growth needs to be compared on a revenue basis. We'll talk on Amazon, who's $10 billion a quarter, whereas right now you'll probably see Google hit, likely $10 billion a year.
Yeah, I think Google as a whole, again, came in overweight, strong quarter. Cloud, Pat, the meat category that you mentioned, I mean, what an explosive category for any business in this space. Um, you heard the growth from Microsoft.
Yeah.
You've heard the growth that's coming from Cisco WebEx. You've heard Zoom has been explosive, and no matter how much you and I as analysts may not love some of their security decision making, some of the questionable PR commentaries that have come from the executive suite of that company, it's almost like everyone needs it, nobody cares. And if you're building a meat product right now that works pretty well, I mean, like, I saw all kinds of things come out. Facebook now, another company that reported and had a pretty good report, has a product of what, up to 50 people can meet concurrently in a Facebook app. If I was a business owner, I would never use a Facebook app. I mean,
Run away. Run away.
for the hills. I mean, Pat, I sit on the fence because I use Google Productivity. I understand that there is some overlap with Google and Facebook in terms of their advertisers, and that's their main stream of revenue. But I feel like Google has even made a little more effort to demarcate the enterprise and productivity products that are being offered, as opposed to Facebook, who literally feel like everything you do is just for sale.
Yeah, I mean, what's the first thing that Thomas Kurian said when he got on stage at his first big stage event was, I want to make this very clear. We do not share or sell or infer any data that you put in our cloud. That was the first thing he said. I think it was smart. And his pedigree of Oracle, which is a trusted company when it comes to privacy and security, I think it went a long way.
Yeah, exactly, Pat. And so Google and Amazon have both been able to run a little bit away from the advertising side of the business to build trust. I mean, clearly with AWS. So I'll leave Google on that, and let's actually pivot to Amazon, which I believe you just got off a few calls covering this topic, and so I'll let you weigh in first, but I certainly have some opinions on this one as well.
Yeah. I don't normally start off with kind of motherhood and apple pie here, but what really blew me away was in Amazon's release here, they talked about all the things it was doing to fight COVID-19. Now, the biggest shocker here is literally, and this was funny, in the press release, it literally said, you're going to have to sit down for this one. They're spending all of their Q2 OpEx, so next quarter's OpEx, $4 billion on COVID-19 related expenditures. And that to me was incredible. They talked about having in their distribution centers 31,000 thermometers, 1,000 thermal cameras, 150 process changes between it and even what it's doing in Whole Foods, 175,000 new hires. They doubled overtime pay to $34 an hour. They suspended 10,000 price gougers, and they paused lending payments to other partners. And I think it's pretty awesome. And for people who have put Amazon in this, it's a company that's profiteering from the issues. Well, here's how they did. Their revenue did grow 26%, but at a huge cost. Their operating income reduced 10%, and they did not, do what I think people thought they were going to do, which was blow the doors off on everything. Their net income was down another $1 billion year over year. So they're taking the COVID hit here. Now, at AWS, right, continues to impress, 33% growth, which, by the way, $10 billion quarter. So the company is on a times 4, $40 billion revenue company. That makes AWS larger than Salesforce and SAP, a division of Amazon. So yeah, I'm impressed, and I'm sure the naysayers will talk about, well, it's 33% growth in AWS versus my 800% growth on, a small little tiny piece of business. But facts are the facts. I mean, they grew more in a quarter then most companies will even register an entire year of cloud.
Look, this whole COVID-19 situation, Pat, is certainly a giant opportunity for the giants. The companies that are in strong cash positions, that have strong market share, digitally transformed businesses, e-commerce capabilities, Amazon can do everything for you. It really is the truth. Whether you need groceries or toilet paper, whether you need new TVs, new computers, workout equipment, some cloud services, get it all there. And you can't knock a good company that has a solid footing. Bezos's remarks about doing more to protect the workers, to invest. I believe the company hired like 100. I believe was it 175,000 employees during this period of time.
That's right.
Tremendous growth in employment during a time when, by the way, 30 million people fell off the payroll in this period of time. So that's about 1% of that whole fall is being made up by one company that's very committed to giving some of its riches back to society, Pat. So I don't, certainly big companies are always going to be accused of being somewhat greedy and opportunistic. To some extent, that's probably more jealousy than true desire, because most of the time folks like Bezos and Gates are the world's greatest philanthropists, because that's what, when you have everything, that's what you do with what's left. You give back. And so I'm mostly impressed. Pat, the fact of the matter is, again, given the global circumstances, they blew out revenue. People just, it's so weird. People just want to complain. They blew out revenue. They still had good earnings. I mean, remember, this is a company that only a few years ago didn't even make money. And so they're still making good money. AWS is exploding. Like you said, a $10 billion a quarter company, and people are going to pout and sell off the stock. Whatever. Like I said, this isn't investment advice, so don't listen to me, but I would say it might not be a bad time to buy, when it goes down a lot. And it did go down.
Don't listen to what Daniel just said, everybody.
Yeah, don't listen to me. I'm not giving you advice. I'm just saying it's not so bad when things fall like 6 or 7% in an hour. So anyways, let's move forward and talk about another company that reported today, took a bit of a hit, and that was Apple. So by the way, beat on revenue, beat on earnings, $29 billion in iPhone revenue, $13 billion in service revenue, which is a number a lot of people are watching closely, because that's been the pivot. Mac revenue and iPad came in at about $10 billion. Wearables, so those ear pods that everybody's wearing, another $10 billion. And the margin was solid. So it was a beat on all fronts. The revenue was good, but again, not good enough. The war chest of Apple took a little bit of a hit. They fell below $200 billion in cash. I know they only have about 200. The company has about $200 billion in cash lying around.
They're dead, Daniel. They're dead.
They're in terrible shape. But overall, Pat launched their new iPhone SE in a very timely way this quarter. A low cost, not 5G, which is something we're all waiting for, but a low cost device to help the company be competitive during the right time when the economy is hard up. And the service revenue was really good. That's something that, I think needs to be paid a lot of attention to, because I called it out. We've been talking about this for years, Pat. There are a lot of good devices. Companies like Samsung are making extremely competitive products at low prices, and the iPhone's going to struggle to keep growing. It's grown and it's been explosive. We heard there's going to be a delay with the flagship this year. Again, no 5G. At least I don't think so. Maybe they'll surprise, but at this point, it doesn't look that way. But it was good to see the rise in services, which got, like I said, up. I think that's the iCloud, that's the music, that's the movies, and that's big, because that's going to offset all the pressure on the iPhone. So I would say, Pat, overall, it was a good quarter. Again, it was a bad day in the market, so people kind of looked at this really negatively. But gosh, amidst all this, a global pandemic, Apple had to shut down their stores in China for most of the quarter, in the US for the rest of it. And the company still exceeded the expectations of the street, and people are crying. What gives?
So, I mean, not that you're not being honest. Let's be honest. that the company lives or dies based on iPhones and all the ARPU of the services that come through that. And iPhones took a nosedive, not as big as I think they're going to have in Q2, but they declined 7% in iPhones. And the question is, where did those customers go? Did they just stick with their phones, or didn't they? I think that the street is disappointed that Apple didn't come out with some special financing program that said no payments until 2021. I mean, when it becomes a choice between rent, the car payment, and food, are you going to upgrade 12-year-old Johnny's iPhone, or are you going to eat? I think this is the thing that people are forgetting. And I had some people who challenged me on Twitter today that said, well, that's the carrier's responsibility. Well, the carriers aren't making a whole lot of money these days. Apple's sitting on a pile of cash, and I think that they really need to think about how they're gonna dole that out. And I think they should do a special financing program with no payments until 2021, and their stock would skyrocket. But don't listen to me. Do not buy stock based upon
yes.
what I'm saying.
Nothing we say is a recommendation. I will say this a lot because it's an earnings show.
Yeah.
I'll remind you that. But Pat, so I'll give you two sides of it. The financing program will make a lot more sense later this year. I actually think the company will do it. I think they're going to, maybe it won't be that, but there will be something. But when the new launch was a cheap device, why blow the wad on a $300 or $400 iPhone when the company's going to roll out a $1,500 device that is going to be needed in high volume come the holiday season?
Well, they rarely meet demand first out. I mean, the last SE, it took 3 to 4 months to actually meet demand. And I don't know if that was artificial or not. I mean, many companies will put out an inexpensive phone to hit a low price point and then limit the amount of volume that they sell, right? Because they just want to hit a price point. They want to put it in the ad, and you go in the store and it's not available, and you get upgraded another $100, $200, which is richer in margin dollars. And I'm not saying Apple planned that for the original SE, but we'll see if there are stockouts. And I wouldn't, you can bet that the SE on a gross margin dollar basis on how much they're making is much lower than an iPhone 11.
Yeah, no question about it, Pat. And those kinds of strategies are always played by players when there's that kind of demand. The question is there that kind of demand? That's what you're asking. If they were typically holding demand, then the company may not have to hold it, but it can still meet those same numbers. My point is, the flagship that comes out in the third quarter towards the holidays is the one that a lot of margin is made, and accelerating purchases from people who may be on the fence or not looking to upgrade, and giving them the incentive could be a really sound way to keep things going, Pat. We got to keep moving here. Let's talk about AMD, Pat. So AMD solid, comes in $222 million, 18 cents a share. Income at $222 million and $1.79 billion, right on the money. So wasn't a blowout quarter for AMD, but again, you hear a trend here: tech hitting the numbers, tech hitting the numbers, tech hitting the numbers. Everybody thought the world was ending. Not for tech. Tech is doing quite well. The company crushed it on the compute side. So in compute and graphics, almost all the revenue, 1.44 of the 1.79, and a 73% growth year over year. That means some market share. That means some market share gains, which, and again, I've only more critical than Apple have I been of AMD, but you have to give credit to AMD that what it's been doing in Ryzen and Radeon is starting to work, and the market share on the consumer side has been really good, and that's starting to probably sprinkle into commercial, Pat. On the enterprise side, 348, so it's still a small business relatively speaking. but a number of new wins, new commitments. I just saw an email come out this week about Oracle Cloud offering an Epic AMD-based Epic variant. More and more of the cloud providers are starting to roll out the Epic product. A lot of softness in semi-custom, which is essentially that they're the new game consoles. So AMD has a big cycle of business that comes when the game consoles come out, and there hasn't been any launches. But around the holiday season this year, that's going to make a difference. There's also some new commercial launches in the works that everybody's kind of waiting on around Ryzen 4000. So going to have to keep an eye on that and hear what that's going to mean for the company. But Pat, not as much to cover here as say Apple or Microsoft, because AMD is a lot more targeted and focused. But as a whole, it was a good quarter. I mean, the company continues to grow. Investors continue to like it. And they have a very passionate community of people that are very committed to the product. Still a lot of headwinds. Less in the compute and on the client and compute side than on the data center side. But even on data center side, what was it? Double-digit growth year over year for for Epic. So
actually, solid. It was double. And hey, can I give a little bit different view on that?
Please.
So every one of the companies we've talked about before had a certain percentage revenue growth. AMD beat them all. AMD had a monster growth. They had 40% revenue growth, Daniel, which is higher than Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, and Qualcomm, and set records. Record notebook. And even when I was there, they sold more notebooks in a quarter than ever in the history of the company. They increased their margin, their gross margin by 5%. Which they had telegraphed, which came from rich notebook and pulling back on console, and I think that's exceptional. I think everybody would like to see more Epic server CPUs sold, particularly when you're seeing Intel pop off 3 data-centric $800 million upsides on the quarter. What AMD did say, they did tell me and everybody they went double digit sequentially, but year over year was triple digit. I wish they would have told somebody more people about that, but I think the number is so high because they were starting off such a low base. It doesn't do much. Here's the other thing. Unlike everybody else we talked about, AMD stuck with guidance for 2020. With 25% growth, which makes it still a growth stock. And I think with AMD's consumer bend to most of its client computing sales does warrant kind of that plus or minus 5% guard band to put around that forecast. And they stuck with a 45% gross margin target. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was exceptional. Not only did the revenue percent growth in the quarter be higher than anybody else we're talking about, they're the only company that kept their annual guide.
Yeah, I think there's some credit that needs to be given. I don't know that it was a different view. I just happened to, conveniently leave out that 40% growth. No, actually, I just glossed over it. I was going a little bit quickly down the numbers there. Yeah, that is an impressive growth, Pat. But you and I have to be honest with our listeners here that there's a law of large numbers. So, for instance, when we talk about Google, wham, bam, how good Azure's doing versus AWS, well, both companies are doing well, but Amazon and AWS is dealing with the law of large numbers.
And Intel's client growth, 14%, is monster in dollar numbers compared to AMD's 70%.
Correct. We just have to always pay attention and make sure for everyone out there that's listening, we set the stage. That doesn't make the success for AMD any less significant, except for the fact that sometimes when we go, oh, Intel's commercial grew 20%, and you're like, that's not, well, that was $4 billion, and that's more than, that's like a year of sales for the entire other chip company. So we just have to balance that out, Pat, but it was a good quarter. And
the fun part is when Intel hits on a big revenue and a big percent, their CSPs go up 50% in one quarter. So we're talking big percent and big revenue.
And if you look at the dollars per share created by AMD's big competitors, it's better. It is. It's just better. It's a lot better right now. That doesn't mean Lisa Su and AMD aren't doing a great job. It just means there's a long way to go for the company.
Yeah, and let me be clear. When I said all the others up here, I'm really talking about, on a percentage basis. But you're right, on the whole dollar amount, it's a very similar comparison between Google Cloud and AWS on a percentage growth.
Right. So if Google says, "Oh, we grew 100%," and AWS says, "Yeah, we sold that yesterday," and it's not even really sardonic. It's actually how big some of these giants have become. And so again, both deserve credit, but they are in different. These companies are in different stages of their life cycles, and we need to make sure just to keep pointing that out. So bravo for AMD. We'll have to keep our eyes on how it goes, and we'll see if Lisa was right, because this will be one of those things in about 2 quarters. We'll look back and say, was keeping guidance the right decision? But it was bold, and if anything, she is that. So let's go to our last one, Pat, and it's a company we like to talk about a lot here on the 6-5 podcast. And by the way, thanks everyone for sticking with us. Hopefully you haven't bought any stock yet, because we didn't tell you to. I'm just reminding you of that. But I do love these earnings show, Pat. I do love talking, especially when they just pour in like this over the course of the week. But guess what? Another company, another big tech company with a big important role, this time in wireless and communications, Qualcomm, hit their targets.
There we go.
Crazy. Nobody was going to make it. The world was ending this quarter. It was over. Next quarter, by the way, will probably be a better tell of just how bad things really are. But
that's right.
Let's stay positive for a minute here. Let's just stay 88 cents against 78. So a solid beat there. 5.21 bill against just over 5. Again, really pretty good. Now, the company is in the beginning of a 5G wave. And the beginning of the 5G wave, and a lot of people don't realize this, but Qualcomm isn't only making money on chips. They've got a really substantial and very profitable licensing business. So whether it's their technology, Pat, or it's the competitors' technology, Qualcomm tends to benefit with every mobile device sold, and is expanding into new areas like automotive, smart cities, with IoT, where the company is expanding and still bringing intellectual property and licensing. So again, chips and innovation and licensing make money a lot of ways. It makes a lot of regulators really mad, but it's a great business model. There was some softness though, Pat. And so despite the numbers, it was really a numbers, the earnings were so good. A lot of it was because margins were good against what was sold. Wireless devices off 21%. And that's really the number where Qualcomm's bread is buttered. Is more wireless devices, the better Qualcomm does. So those numbers are soft, and the continued expectation the next quarter is a 30% fall off. Just one other comment I have, and I'll turn it over to you. The thing I got most bullish about was when Steve Mollenkopf, CEO, said, we are not changing guidance on 5G. The question was, with all of this depression, recession, economic strain, and 5G devices, typically, with the exception of the Samsung one we talked about in a recent episode of the 6-5, being on the high end of the premium tier, 175 to 225 million expected 5G devices being sold this year, Pat. I think that gives investors, and should give people who are kind of industry analysts and looking at the company, some confidence that this technology is pivotal. It is critical during this difficult time, and may even be more important now than in normal circumstances as it pertains to keeping people and companies connected.
Yeah, so I mean, these guys had a better Q2 than I had expected. They did hit the mid-range of their guidance for revenue and EPS, and even though Snapdragon volumes came in below the midpoint, they still were well within their guide. And I think, you made a good comment, which is, the next quarter will be their fiscal Q3 will be harder. The company did a good job hitting EPS. They had cost controls. They had forecasted 5 to 7% below the line, and they ended up coming in at 4, which I think was exceptional. And yeah, you're right. That 30% handset unit reduction, hitting EPS by 30 cents a share, is a challenge for the next quarter. But I wholeheartedly agree with you on the big surprise on 5G forecast. They're sticking to their 175 million to 225 million units which is extremely profitable. It's extremely profitable on the chips, and it's extremely profitable for the IP. And Cristiano made a point on the earnings call to really dial in and talk about China, which is, Apple might be pulling back the reins on 5G, as they talked a little bit about on their call today. But that certainly has nothing to do with the overall market. So according to Qualcomm, I mean, for 5G handsets, it's business as usual, COVID or no COVID.
Yeah, Pat, I think that's great. And just for anyone that doesn't know Cristiano like we do, that's Cristiano Amon. He's the president and COO.
Thank you.
And he tends to be a very active from the operator standpoint of the company. Always has his hands on kind of the pulse of some of the more semantics that Steve Mollenkopf, the CEO, isn't always as closely tied to. And he did make some really good ads to provide color to the analyst community about what was going on. Pat, 5G is the place to be. 5G, this is my Kramer moment, but if this lasts 6 months, the demand is only going to get pent up. The demand is going to get pent up. It's not going away. People aren't going to not buy 5G phones. They might not buy them for 3 months or 6 months, but if I was looking at the types of technology, cloud and 5G are two of the, cloud, 5G, and I'll say AI. I wrote something today about that with NVIDIA and Mellanox, but cloud and AI will be the workloads that are going to be accelerating like crazy. And basically, 5G is going to be the way every person in sort of a modernized society are going to be connecting. It's the future of smart city. And by the way, 5G is going to be important for things like tracing applications that might be a big part of this COVID-19 solution, but it's going to come down to very, very precise networks, communications, and connectivity. So I look for a company like Qualcomm to be there. But overall, Pat, this is a positive week. This show really could have been a bummer. And in 3 months, when you and I get back on and do this same victory lap of earnings, hopefully our victory lap is also these companies' victory lap, because when these big companies are performing well, these companies create a lot of jobs. These companies are really important to the global innovation ecosystem. And by the way, they're very important to many of our cases in our daily entertainment, what we do. What would life be without Amazon and Google right now? Take Netflix away and I would have nothing to talk about. So, everyone out there, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in to Pat and I here on the 6-5. Sorry if you're watching this live and you can see my face getting beaten by the sun. I still need to get some shades up in my office. So apologize about the light, but even that'll get better. But for this episode, for now, hit the subscribe button. But we got to go. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.